I am a human being and I kill human beings.
Before I knew it, I'd fired 4 shots at the door. I kept on shouting for Eva to phone the police.
Tests are underway to determine if a serial killer is on the loose in Centurion, Pretoria.
The dead won't bother you. It's the living you gotta worry about.
All right, in a country marked by the hello everybody, in a country marked by the harsh reality of 84 daily murders, these are the stories that echo through the reality of life in South Africa. Hello, this is Paul Llewellyn, and we are live on Profiler Africa here on YouTube. Hit the like button and subscribe if you haven't already. It is very important. It really does help us. Joining me as always to discuss crime on the continent is Gerard, an author, former law enforcement officer and current head of LNS Threat Management. Labuschagne helmed the investigative psychology section of the South African Police Service from 2001 to 2016. And he is, of course, our profiler. He worked on over 300 serial murder and rape cases and is, of course, the profiler. Hello, Gerard. How are you doing today?
Hi, Paul. Good and yourself, and hello to everybody who's tuned in.
It's been quite the week, eh? I mean, quite the response to our last live stream.
Yeah, it's pretty impressive. I don't think we thought it was going to get so big so quick. So thank you to everybody who's liked, subscribed, and done all the standard things.
Exactly, and hopefully we can just continue to grow and grow. Tonight we're going to be diving deep into the Quarry Killer case. As we mentioned last week, there's a pattern to serial cases in South Africa, and this case is really a textbook example of how serial murders often unfold here. We have covered this case before, but we figured that now we're in this new format where we can bring you a lot more kind of rich media. We can bring you crime scene photos and, forensic material, some of the footage we've been filming, making the TV shows. So we figured we'd go over what is really a great example of how a serial killer operates in South Africa, typically, and the monumental effort it takes to bring such a criminal to justice. So stick around. And yeah, we're going to be diving into that in a second. Before we do that, just a bit of admin. Make sure you've subscribed to the channel, hit the like button, and don't forget to engage with us in the live chat. We love hearing your thoughts, questions, and comments. We're saving the last 10 minutes for Q&A, so we'll be going through some questions. If you want to share some of your questions with us now in relation to the case or just general questions for Gerard. And also we'll just be looking at some of the feedback from folks that watched during the week. Please also support the show. We're committed to bringing you the best in local true crime content, but we can't do it without your support. Right now we're running on measly amounts, but it really is a labor of love. So, all the help just helps us to be able to make this thing more sustainable and, just bring you all those great stories that you love. If you're enjoying what we're doing, consider supporting us by becoming a friend of the pod on Patreon or signing up as a member on YouTube. We are going to be posting exclusive content there, including interviews and behind-the-scenes insights. It's just a small donation, and you get access to exclusive interviews like our uncut interview with Tanya Faree, who is the investigator who solved the case of South Africa's youngest female serial killer from Jan Kempdorp, which is the case we spoke about last week. So that's a really great uncut interview with her, really talking about, what went on with that case. Don't forget super likes. Those are a huge help in supporting our work. Drop a super like and we'll mention you during the episode. Also, check out True Crime Room with Derek Reedley. Episode 2 is starting at 9 o'clock, straight after this on Profiler Africa. So head over once you're done. The case of Michael van Eck tonight, which is it's a real goodie. So please do stay tuned for that. All right, so that's that done. Please do support the channel. We'd really, the more you help us, the more we kind of build this community, the more we can do. The Quarry Killer case, Gerard. First of all, we're from Joburg, so, we know what this city's like. We know kind of what the pros and the cons are, what to look out for and what to avoid. For those people who don't, let's kind of set the scene. Where did this case take place? What's life like in these areas, especially for those people who might have crossed the path of the Quarry Killer?
Yeah, so this took place in Centurion, which is kind of one of the suburbs on the southern side of Pretoria. as you're heading towards Johannesburg. So you have on the one hand sort of a nice middle class area, and kind of just almost over a road, over a field, you've got a Liebenhout-Bosch township, which is it's not an informal settlement. It's kind of roads and buildings and a lot of RDP houses. So that's kind of the environment. But of course, a lot of people on that side of the road are from your much lower income type of areas, and of course would be desperate for employment. And around it, of course, there's a lot of felt areas, as you'll see some of the pictures that we're going to talk about.
Okay, so all right. So Gerard, the first thing we need to, I think, get into is just where do we start with this? Because what's interesting about this case is that it's really split kind of over two distinct periods. And the first being in 2002, when lo and behold, there's enough serial killers working around this city that a number of cases turn up, and there's a bit of uncertainty about who the murderer might be, because there's a serial killer who had become known as the Highwayman who is active in the area at that time. So jump in for us, Gerard. Yeah.
So early in 2002, between January and September, we were starting to look at some bodies that were popping up, not here where you see these pictures now, but a bit more towards Pretoria, if you know the Rigel off-ramp, if you know the Monument Park golf course. There were bodies around there, and that was what sort of kicked off what was originally referred to as the Highwayman murder series, because the bodies were along the highway. It's quite an obvious one. And that kind of started off a serial murder investigation. And as it kind of went further, and then we had the 5 bodies from January to September, and then I think it was by October, November, we catch a guy and we link him to some bodies that were sort of October, November. He kind of does some confessions. He points out some crime scenes. We have some evidence linking him to some of those bodies. But we realized that he had been in prison for the period of during the cases that were taking place in January to September. Like I said, and these ones were a bit further away from the ones we did link him to. And that guy was someone called Elias Chauke, who then became known as the Highwayman. So we realized that he couldn't have committed the crime scenes that you see on your screen right now. Those are the ones from January to September, because, as I said, turned out he was in jail for the first portion of the year and couldn't have committed those. And like I said, they were geographically further away, but also kind of along one of the highways. And we typically throw our net wide when we're doing a serial murder investigation, because we know these guys can deviate a little bit in terms of the geographical area, etc. So we tend to throw the net wide, and then kind of as we narrow it down to see which cases could be the work of this individual. So basically Elias eventually gets convicted, I think in 2004, of all those 5 murders from October and November. And we now sit with the ones from January to September, the ones that were a little bit further away, that were grouped close to each other. And all the investigations have been done. No suspect is identified.
Okay. So the bodies that started turning up around the river in 2002, when did those kind of come into the limelight?
Probably about the second or third one, somebody picked up that there was something happening. As I said, we already, that was as a kicking off the Highwayman stuff. So that was already we were already starting to look at that, and we did form a task team for the Highwayman cases. And then of course you always look backwards, see if you can find cases that you didn't yet know about, because you can't assume the ones in front of you are the only ones. You have to start looking at the dockets from cases in neighboring police stations, and you kind of, as I said, you start to look far and wide, not just for murder cases, but you look for assault cases, you look for rape cases, where it could have been the suspect who just didn't go all the way with a particular victim. Maybe the victim fought back, or there's just certain circumstantial reasons why they didn't. So those cases would not be murder cases. They'll be opened up as something else. So you kind of have to look at that wider geographical area, not just murders, but rapes, assaults, robberies of women in the veld, to see if that could not also be your suspect. And sometimes those cases are the breakthrough cases.
Okay. So in 2002, who was putting together, who was figuring out that this group of bodies that is being found is related? When do you come in? Are you in the mix at this stage?
So I was definitely at the last body in September. I was definitely on that crime scene, but I'd also already been involved, and that was, I think, about the 5th of September. but I'd already probably been involved for about a month already, looking at some of the ones further back towards Pretoria.
Okay. Okay, so these 2002 cases happen. We unpack the fact that this is not it's not the highwayman, it's somebody else, because he was in prison at the time that these cases occurred. So what's going on? Is there a team? Are you gathering evidence? Are the guys trying to figure out who's responsible for these 2002 cases? And then and then maybe we can talk about what those 5 cases are. And how do we then jump to 2006 eventually?
So basically, the same task team, the highwayman task team, looked at all the further information from those dockets. We couldn't identify those victims. We did all the outstanding possible investigations. And eventually what typically would happen is that a docket where you haven't solved the murder would eventually be presented to a magistrate who would read through it and hold what we call an inquest. And if the magistrate is satisfied that everything was done that could be done, it doesn't get closed off permanently, because we don't have a permanent closing. No murder case is ever closed off permanently unless you convict someone. And that would then be presented to the magistrate and essentially filed. If further information came up later, of course, as was the case here, we would then reopen those cases and you can charge someone.
Okay. So should we talk about what these 5 cases were in 2002? Yeah. Let's just go through them. So if we look here at our map, we've got the first group of cases which are at the top of the top of the map, and then those are in 2002, and then the later 2006 cases will happen around this quarry area in the southern part of this image. So
and on the left-hand side, you can actually see that sort of lighter shade on the bottom left-hand corner. That's a Liebenhout-Bosch township. Okay. Now, this aerial photograph was taken about 4 years later. So obviously you can see some development had taken place compared to the original scene locations. It was far more desolate where those scenes were.
All right, tell us a little bit about this top grouping area, that area now where the river is. Just kind of set the scene of that particular spot.
Yeah, so I mean, look, it's open felt. At the time, there was not much development around it. There were houses, but they were a way off. So it was really like this common felt that's between 2 residential sections. Nothing going on there. There might be some footpaths moving between. So it's really quite desolate, and people often take shortcuts through these areas to get to work, etc.
Yeah, it's a lot more built up there now. I mean, there's actually a golf course around the river there, and a residential kind of complexes right there in that area. But at the time, it would have been a lot more isolated and a great spot. And this is where we start, because I think the one thing that's going to come through this episode is kind of the themes in South Africa. You've got very big open landscapes where, even in urban areas, you don't have to go too far to find these big open landscapes where you can find kind of isolated spots away from prying eyes relatively easily. Right. All right, so should we look at then the first case in 2002, Gerard? Who was the first victim?
So none of the 2002 cases were identified, so we can't put any names to them. But this was about the 13th of January. They couldn't determine the cause of death, but we essentially have an adult black female who's lying naked in the open felt. And that's really all we had, no forensic evidence.
Okay. And then, doing what you can, gathering what evidence you can, and then next, in April 2002, another body pops up.
And this one was quite a bit more decomposed, covered by grass, left near some water. You can see water on the bottom left-hand side of the picture. And this was more towards the right in some reeds. And cause of death appeared to be blunt force trauma, but again, an unidentified victim. So really not forensically rich crime scenes. For
sure. All right. And then we can jump on to case number 3, which then took place in June 2002.
So this is now back over the highway. This is the Krugersdorp Highway, compared to the previous 2 scenes we've just noticed. And this river is going to become quite a central theme throughout the whole series. A lot of bodies you'll see are found in a river, and it's the same river, just different points further back up. In the water, naked from the waist down, also multiple head trauma to this particular victim. And that's it. Again, we just don't have any info.
Yeah. I mean, just elaborate on the fact that, in other parts of the world, maybe the identification kind of rate in cases like this, I would imagine would be a fair amount higher. We do have, typically in South Africa, it's difficult to identify, what percentage of a series would typically be identified? Let me put it that way.
Yeah, we have a higher, in series specifically, we have a high number of people who don't get identified. I mean, you'll see in this case, eventually, I think only 5 out of the 16 were identified, if I recall correctly. So it's quite common in series specifically. And again, this could be, unemployed people or people from neighboring countries who are here illegally. They've never been fingerprinted anywhere at any stage. Therefore, I mean, still fingerprints are one of our best ways of trying to identify people, because that at least can quite easily lead you to an identity. DNA, you have to have a suspicion who the person could be before you confirm it with DNA. And the same with dental records. You first have to think it could be John Smith, because there aren't these big national databases. Fingerprints is a bit easier because you can try and run it through the Home Affairs database. You can run it through the police arrested persons database. So fingerprints are still the cheapest, quickest, and easiest way. And there are ways of getting fingerprints from skin that is quite dehydrated from being outside exposed to the elements. They're quite gruesome, but good ways of doing that.
Okay. Okay, and just what are some of the challenges, kind of environmental challenges from this part of the world as well? I mean, you've got the series, the first victims kind of earlier in the year. Our summer is over Christmas, so it's hotter, warmer over that period. So, Northern Hemisphere winter is when it's hot down here, and obviously that has an impact on evidence gathering, depending how long a body is susceptible to the elements here. Can you just break down that a little bit?
Look, I mean, if you leave a body out exposed like these bodies were on land, they decompose incredibly quickly. You're out in the direct sunlight. You'll have insects almost immediately present doing their thing. You'll have possibly small predators that will start to eat away at the body. But just the general decomposition being out in the sun. Water also, you still get fairly quick decomposition. It's just a different type of decomposition in some ways. You have a lot of aquatic animals, and in most of these cases already things like crabs were starting to gnaw away at the little bits like the ears and the nose and the lips and the eyelids, etc. So yeah, I mean, decomposition is quick on land. It's pretty quick on water. It's just perhaps looks a little bit differently. I mean, probably the slower one, probably burying the body, to be honest with you. That's slower. That would be slower than out of those 3, I think.
Yeah. And then what is our kind of DNA database like? What access to people's information do people have outside of more traditional things like fingerprints, like we've mentioned? I mean, even fingerprints being a challenge, like you said.
So back then, the SAPS was not officially allowed to keep a database of DNA. So, and of course, you would only have DNA, for example, from a crime scene. And a suspect that you've arrested and needed to take a DNA swab for. If they were found not guilty or the case was withdrawn, I think you had to remove the swab. Or if you swabbed 10 people and maybe you had one of your suspect could be these 10 people in a house, you swab all of them, and if the other people prove not to be that part of that the suspect, you're then supposed to destroy the DNA. It has changed since then, and partly because of this case, as you hear later. But we don't swab people at birth. I mean, and I know there's always issues like privacy, etc. But it would really be great if we could get a DNA sample of people from birth, because then if we do find bodies, we would probably identify them easier. But also from a crime point of view, if someone left their DNA on a crime scene from blood or semen or even just touching something, we would be able to identify them. So back then there was not really any such a thing as a DNA database.
Okay. All right, great. So that gives people a little bit more context as well, just to understand. Because, the one thing I love about just about true crime in general, and something which maybe isn't emphasized enough in true crime content, is the fact that different parts of the world, the nature of crime, of something like murder, varies as a result of the cultural, the social, the political differences within a country. And, those kind of nuances are often very interesting to understand. So we've got 3 bodies so far, and then in June a 4th turns up.
Yeah.
Did we do 4th? Are we on to 5th?
No, we haven't done
So we
fourth
had
yet.
body number
Back.
4, yes. Okay,
This
June
is
2002.
So this is that same river. Now you see that like a road in the middle. It's kind of like a dam wall and a road.
Sure.
And that kind of blocks, as you can see, a lot of the water. And it's not a very big river anyway. I mean, there's usually not a lot more water than what you see on the left-hand side. And there we find a young lady floating face down, mainly clothed. And the cause of death in this case was blunt force trauma to the liver. So this is the fourth victim found and again, aquatic animals that started to do their thing quite quickly on this body.
Okay. And is there a sense that there's, obviously he's managing to get his victims out to a very isolated location. Is there a sense that he's trying to at least conceal the bodies a bit when they're there kind of at the crime scenes?
Not so much conceal, he just left them where they are. Now, Again, this somebody would have found quite quickly because of where it's found. Now, of course, we don't know how far that it moved down in the river and just get stuck at the dam wall. It doesn't mean he killed her there, of course. But yeah, what we typically see as serial murderers don't really hide their bodies or bury them or do very fancy, sophisticated things to dispose of them, typically in South Africa.
Okay. And then the final victim for this part of the series, and here you can see this is actually an image taken from the road, isn't it? Looking down the river.
Yeah.
So in the video clips that we've got, which I'll put back up in a second, you can see this is developed now. It's a golf course on the left and right-hand side of where the river is here. But
There's a
here you can
fancy
see
housing estate on the right called Thatch Field, etc. So this is perhaps the most important one out of all of these bodies. And it's different in a certain way. So the top of the screen, just out of the shot of this picture, you would have seen that dam wall where that other lady was up against. As you correctly said, where this person is standing, taking the photograph, you're standing like on the edge of the highway. And then underneath these long tunnels that run underneath the highway, because that's like, I think, a 3-lane highway at that point with a grass median and then another couple of lanes. So it's about a very long space underneath these tubes that would run under. So there's a dam wall you can see now when the bottom of the screen. That's where this lady would have been lying, where we are now, and then you'll maybe just see the highway coming up at the bottom. There you go. Now that thing on the left, that green thing, and the nice golf course on the right and left, those weren't there at the time, for sure. This is obviously many years later.
Yeah. Okay, so we have 5 victims at this stage, Gerard. And then yes,
this one's very important quickly for a couple of reasons. Firstly,
please.
Although we don't have a close-up picture here because it's a bit sensitive, but this lady the water where she's lying in is about this deep, and it doesn't ever really get much deeper than that because of the dam wall. You have her lying face down. She's got bright red pants on, a red top, but there's a huge rock placed on her back. But it's not, she didn't die from blunt force trauma. She didn't drown. The rock wasn't part of killing her, but also it's not as if she was weighted down with the rock and the water level dropped by a meter and suddenly the body was exposed. So it really created the impression that the person probably wanted the body to be kept in that place, to be found, and to see how long it takes, to see what the police are doing. I don't know, because if you dragged her under the highway in those tunnels, it would have taken a lot longer for anybody to find her. Or if you put that rock on her back in the same place as the previous victim, the water would be about 1.5 meters deep, and she would have taken forever before somebody might have discovered her body. So it really created the impression that the suspect wanted her kept right there. She has these bright red pants on, very visible, for the body to be discovered for whatever reasons. Yeah.
Okay, so you've got 5 cases. It's a series. What happens then? I mean, suddenly things go quiet, and that must always be concerning, or does it, in this town, does it just kind of, you move on to the next batch of murders, I guess?
So remember, we were still busy thinking this is all highwaymen, and of course now we start to find the highwaymen bodies in October, November, and we catch Elias Chauke. So this whole time we're busy with this investigation, and it kind of all stops when we catch Chauke in November, and we realize that he couldn't have committed these ones. We do whatever we can to finalize these cases, investigations that you've just seen. And really, then we kind of close it off and move on with life. And as I said, we prepare for Elias Chauke's trial. And because there's nothing else to follow up on the cases we've just looked at, there's nothing more you can do from an investigation point of view.
There's nothing more you can do. Okay, we're going to get back into the case again in a minute. We'll talk about the 2006 cases, but I just want to do a little bit of a little bit of admin. So PlotShift is your go-to partner for powerful storytelling and cutting-edge production. What you're looking for, whether you're looking for commercial work or want to fund exciting local content, we're here to shift your perspective of what you should and could be doing. Visit us at plotshift.co.za to explore what we create together. Okay, so head over there and check that out. Again, please hit like and subscribe. It's so important. It really does help us. We want to kind of grow our African presence in the YouTuberverse, I think is our mission in life, isn't it? Also, don't miss a beat. Join our conversation to the truth. Follow us on Instagram, guys, as well, and Facebook. And soon we'll be getting we'll be getting kind of into X and TikTok. We're kind of working on that. Trying to do some more short format content for you guys as well. You can check out all we post crime scene photographs and material on those platforms as well, and let you know what's coming up on the show. So please do go over there. And if you want to go deeper into the case files, unlock exclusive content by supporting us on Patreon or becoming a YouTube member. It's just a little donation. You'll get bonus material, interviews, and even more evidence we can't share anywhere else. And don't forget, super likes are a killer way to support the show. Drop one, and we'll mention your comment during the episode for sure. Your help keeps this investigation alive. Stay engaged, stay informed, and let's crack more local crime stories together. So please, guys, we're quite overwhelmed by how well the podcast was received in this last week. Hey, Gerard, what do you think? I put it down to the fact that everyone loves you, and all these being on the news all the time and in documentaries. It's like you're everyone's favorite profiler.
I don't know about that, but thank you for the support, everybody out there.
All right, cool. Let's get back into the case then. All right, so 2002, we have 5 murders. We think it might be the highwayman because there's serial killers all over town. It's not. Suddenly, these 5 cases stop. Gerard carries on crime busting for 4 years. And in 2006, we have this series, which begins around slightly south of where our previous crime scenes were, around the Quarry. Thus, our killer's ultimate moniker, the Quarry Killer. So, Gerard, take us into this. What was the first? When did you get involved in this case? Not on the first one, right. Was it?
No. So basically, I think it was after the second body. There were 2 bodies found early January, and it was after the second one that then Detective Inspector Buti Baloyi, who was one of, I think, 2 or 3 people at Veerbridge Police Station investigating any unnatural deaths. Now, what that means is 2 or 3 guys at a police station will investigate a death from a car accident, from a guy who fell off the roof, a suicide, and of course things like your murders. I mean, it's really a overwhelming task for 1 or 2 people to have to do. So Buti had realized that, hang on a minute, this is 2 bodies, similar circumstances. This has got to be something more important. He wasn't aware of the cases from 2002 because I don't think he was stationed at Veerbridge Police Station back then. So when he came to see us, we said, hang on a minute, we have an old unsolved series not too far away, I think 2.8 kilometers as the crow flies, from the bodies you've just found. We think it's our guy who's back operating again after a 4-year break. And of course, that turned out to be a correct assumption. So we then kind of said to him, look, we're going to try getting the wheels of the machine turning to get approval for a task team to be formed. But in the meantime, because I was in charge of the investigative psychology section, I could allocate whatever resources I had to assist from our own side. So definitely we said to him, from now on, notify us whenever you get a crime scene. We will come out. And of course, with our connections and experience, we know all the necessary resources to pull and get involved that your average station detective might not necessarily have immediate access to. So that was one of the advantages of always getting us involved, is besides our incredible knowledge with these kind of cases, we just knew the people at forensics, we knew the people here, we knew the people at forensic pathology. We could just get things happening that a lot of the station detectives just really wouldn't have the sort of ability to do, sadly.
Yeah. Sure. Okay, so he comes to speak to you. He figures out there's a series going on here in 2006. Let's just step back then and just introduce who the first victim was.
Yeah, unfortunately, like the ones from the 2002 cases, we don't know who this victim was.
Sure.
The cause of death was a little bit different. So we saw mainly blunt force trauma of some kind on the earlier victims. This one's manual strangulation. So manual strangulation means the hands. Ligature strangulation means you use some rope or a necktie or some instrument to do it. So manual is always going to be hands. Think of manual labor, same kind of thing. And of course, some blunt force trauma to the chest. But she's face down in the river and completely naked. Already the animals, the crabs, have started to eat away little bits and pieces. And here we kind of then start to do like facial reconstructions. We have people who will do sketches to try and rebuild what's left of the face from what damage is there. We eventually were putting those up in posters in the nearby townships, trying to identify this person. But again, unidentified even till today. But now we start to get a bit more forensic evidence. We eventually find DNA from this victim's body. I think it was semen in the form of semen, which of course later becomes crucial for our linking a guy to the cases. And jumping forward a bit, he also then pointed this crime scene out as one of his crime scenes when we eventually caught our guy.
Okay, so that's the first case then in the 2nd of January. And then
same river that you saw earlier. Yeah.
Just talking about so if we go on to you mentioned the facial identikits, you mentioned this was the case then when the detective inspector kind of realized that he needed to come speak to the unit in Pretoria.
Yeah.
And so this is an example of an identikit here, is it? Or?
Look, not an identikit.
Okay.
It's obviously not a very good one. And if you saw the original picture of this victim, you would understand why it's not particularly great. Some of the other ones were kind of better representations of what a person could be like. But anyhow, so there are people at our forensic laboratory, the ones who'll do the rebuilding up of skulls. Like you used to see in the old days, if you had a skull that you find and you kind of build it up to try and see what the face of the person looks like. They don't really do much of that building up of the skull anymore, but they do more these graphic drawings using the same principles to reconstruct. So here what you would have is a photo from the crime scene, and they're trying to, in a way, judge how much of his swelling is decomposition to try and build it. So, you got to try things, and sometimes it might be enough that somebody says, but that kind of looks like a family member of mine who went missing. You try, you're not always successful, sadly.
For sure. Okay, all right, so that's victim 7. Anything else to tell us about victim number 7?
No, again, victim number 7, really, yeah.
And was also unidentified victim number 8 then? That would be on the 27th of February 2006, or?
I think we've jumped the second body, actually. Yeah, sorry, you're on the third. The second body.
Oh, sorry. Yes, let me go back one.
Which he came to see us. Again, there's not much. Back one more.
Oh wait, this is 6.
There's one out in the belt. Am I? No,
this is the third body in 2006, unless I've messed up the slides.
Yeah, it is. This is number 3. There's one.
Yeah.
But it doesn't matter. Don't go back to it. But the second body, we haven't seen the photos.
No.
That's the one where you did have the reconstruction that I said wasn't so great. But really, it was out in the veld, completely naked, undetermined cause of death. So again, not much. The one you're seeing now, as you rightly said, is the first crime scene that we now started to come to in 2006. Again, she's kind of floated down the river till she hits this kind of dam wall. She's basically also unidentified, fully dressed, except she didn't have underwear. Now, again, we don't know. Does it mean she didn't put on that day, or did the suspect take away underwear? But we have kind of sort of drowning, but also strangulation being reported in the post-mortem, the autopsy report that took place. So this was the first one in 2006 that I was on. And that was 27th of February.
Okay. All right. Shall we just then jump on to the next victim who would have turned up, which is...
And now we fast forward till April, so we have almost 2 months where like nothing's happening. We're in the meantime trying to get authorization to form a task team. That's going slower than paint drying. And we end up with this particular body in April 2006. again, quite decomposed, hence the blurry photograph. And she basically really just has her skirt like pulled up just above her waist. So from her hips downwards is all naked and exposed, and of course naked from basically the waist upwards. We just have the skirt almost like around the middle of her body, but very badly decomposed. Entomology, which of course is using insects on the body, classifying what insect it is, and then looking at what stage of development that insect is. And the entomology kind of said that she died probably about 14 days before her body was discovered. So this is kind of April, so things are getting cooler. So bodies will slow down in terms of how quickly they decompose. And again, because of the level of decomposition, they were unable to determine actually what caused her death.
Okay. Yeah, there's something with the body. I mean, this is also something to talk about, is that, what do you typically find with there's some interesting items, especially with one of the later victims, which kind of, again, speaks to kind of the nature of serial crime in South Africa, and kind of a typical part of a modus operandi that we see.
Yeah. So by now we know from the majority of our cases we've worked on in South Africa that the suspect would offer the victim employment and lure them away. So we could almost bet, without even knowing these victims, their backgrounds, that this is what happened in these cases. We have that as date going back as far back, I think, as 1953, with a case we're going to discuss, I think, in a week or two's time, Elifazi Msomi, which is, we actually have the original court record and the original death warrant. It's quite fascinating to read, and the whole trial record typed out, and the other bits and pieces. We're going to show some of those pictures in one of our future episodes. And that's what this guy was doing. He was going in rural KZN to the different kraals and offering women employment. They would go with them, and then he'd rape them. So this is something that's not new, and it's really born out of a desperation for employment. So you don't get this modus operandi like in the United States or Europe. My friends cannot believe me, my profiler friends, when I tell them that people here will go with a random stranger on a public transport, a taxi, and then they'll walk into the veld with them, and they'll end up getting raped and murdered. But like, why would someone do that? And because you don't have those high rates of unemployment in the US and Europe. What you do get is people more likely picking up a sex worker. So it's still an offer of employment, but you're taking advantage of the vulnerability of that person's employment, and that they will get into a car with you and go to a deserted place. And the fact that they're involved with something illegal means you want to do it out in a hidden area. And that's why we get overseas more sex worker series. We don't get a lot of sex worker series here in South Africa. We had Sifiso Mkonazi most recently, and they jump back quite a number of years, 2000, the Pretoria West prostitute murders, then the Cape Town ones. Mickey Pistorius has written about some of those. But sex workers is really not your typical victim in South Africa at all.
Yeah. And we'll talk more about that over the course of those kinds of interesting aspects. I always find it interesting that what you've said in the past, that if sex workers do start turning up as victims, then one of the assumptions can be that it's a white guy. Why? Because for a white guy, if you have to go and find the most kind of vulnerable victims, and you're more inconspicuous if you're a black South African and you're at the train station, or at the taxi rank, you blend in with the crowd. If you're a white guy in that mix, then you stand out a bit more, and you're leading people away. So you need to be driving around at 2:00 in the morning, looking for victims who are vulnerable, that you can, you can capitalize on those vulnerabilities. Sorry, I put up the picture there of the next victim just because I wanted to kind of continue to talk about, the fact that you can see next to the body here is what a steel basin, and informal workers, street hawkers, street salespeople, etc. This is the kind of thing they'll often have a few of these, and we'll be out, in the course of the day trying to sell them as part of the kind of daily grind. Yeah.
Yeah. So this is Evelyn Dube, the first person that we've identified since 2002 in this series, and there you can see a picture of her on the right and the left-hand side of the screen when she was alive. And she'd come to Liebenhout-Bosch township to sell those very pots that you see lying there. And she was obviously led away from the township, because normally they sell them in the township. And she had been, and this is the same day, she's discovered on the same day as the previous victim. Because typically what do? We search the surrounding areas either by foot or rescue dogs to search for bodies, etc. And on that same day, they discover Evelyn's body. Of course, we didn't know at that time it was Evelyn. She's mainly clothed, but she has a ligature made of cloth around her neck. So what's interesting, again, we have entomology that placed her time of death 30 days before, and it actually proved to be very accurate. She'd come to Liebenhout Bosch on the 19th of March, so literally about 30 days from when her body was actually discovered. So again, amazing how entomology, actually is very, very accurate if it's done properly. So they couldn't confirm the cause of death, but they said asphyxia can't be ruled out because of the ligature around her neck. And again, most serial murderers in South Africa are killing their victims through strangulation. You'll get the exceptions, it'll shoot here and there, but strangulation is like the most common. Firearms is actually the most uncommon in serial murder cases, at least.
Sure. Okay. Any other bits of evidence there that were important? I mean, where were you now at this stage of the investigation? I mean, were you...
Well, Terry
what kind of successes were you having?
In a way, none, because, we don't even... This is the first victim we've identified. We're now, every time we get a body, we're saying head to the provincial office, because we had to get not from the provincial office to have a task team, but from the area. So they used to have, the province would be broken up down into areas. So I think in Gauteng, there was, I don't know, let's say 5 or 6 areas that would have 10, 15 police stations. So Pretoria was an area. So you'd have to go to the area head and say, please, sir, we want a task team. We need some members from this station, from the serious and violent crime unit, from this. Please give us permission to form a task team and just work on these cases. So we're tearing our hair out because it's so difficult to get them to agree to authorize the task team, which really shouldn't have been. So my unit's helping, and Butti's doing this, but he's also doing any other cases that pop up that he's on standby for at this time. And that's why we need to have a task team, because if he's still doing all his other cases and any accident cases where someone died, he's not focusing on these. So that is absolutely essential to get that task team formed.
So between case 5 and the task team, there is one additional victim. That would be victim number 6 of 2006. Again, identified. She turns out to be a Zimbabwean citizen as well.
Yeah, same as Evelyn. I mean, Evelyn and Molina Gunduza were both Zimbabwean citizens. So it's interesting, we're identifying the foreigners. But who else are we not identifying?
Yeah.
So,
all right.
So we do find, again, you can see the pots. So she also came on a particular day. In fact, the day she's discovered, she was found. She came to sell those pots that you see lying there. She's basically naked except for almost like a sports bra, and she's lying in a very awkward position. It's as if someone she had died sitting on a chair and someone just tipped her forward. And you can see ligature marks around her neck. And we do find DNA that now matches the previous DNA from this year. So now, of course, you're starting to make forensic links, which are helpful because, you always have some doubting Thomases. Well, do you know that it's the same suspect? And how do you know it's the same suspect? And we might be convinced from our experience in serial cases, but nobody else is. And that's why the DNA sometimes doesn't become helpful.
Yeah. All right. So we jump onto the formation of the task team, and this is where now the case can really kind of come into its own.
Yeah, and I'm obviously looking at our time. We've got a lot of stuff to get to.
Yeah, exactly.
So basically, so when we do get permission for the task team, I get a phone call saying, "Oh yes, you got your task team, but you're in charge of it." Now that's quite unusual because normally the profiler isn't actually in charge of the investigation, but I guess they wanted someone to blame if it didn't go well. But it was me. It was Jan de Lange, colonel who worked with me in the unit. Yanni, who's now gone on retirement. Fabi, who unfortunately died. He left the police about 2 years after this. And sadly, in a robbery at his house one night, he was shot and killed. Elmarie, who's still there, she's now a lieutenant colonel. And Baloy, of course. And then they gave us actually a student constable, Alpaki Maduna. And I tell you, he proved to be a really, really bright young man. And I do hope he's still in the police. In fact, almost none of these people you see now, except for Elmarie and maybe Paki, are still in the police, sadly.
Now, I also want to, at this stage, dispel a myth that when it comes to serial crime investigations is that, the crime wall, the classic crime wall you see, we've used it on stuff that we've made as well, because, it's very identifiable and people are like, well, they don't use crime walls. Well, guys, I'm here to tell you that crime walls are a thing, okay?
Helpful.
There we go. This is the operations room, guys.
So this is at our offices
Okay.
it was in Visagie Street back in those days. We specifically didn't want to do it at the police station because we knew we would have no control over the information. This is at our head office. Every day, every time we then got together for a task team, we would then meet in the morning in this office, and you start to put the bodies up in the order that you think they were murdered, not the order that they were found. A few details about the case, and of course, what's outstanding. So this really becomes an information management tool.
For sure. And just missing red wool, really, red cotton, red thread, Gerard. I think you would have probably solved this case quicker if you'd managed to link things up with red wool.
We didn't have red thread. It was out.
Just a little word from the wise there. All right, so that's okay. So then, now that there's a task team, I gather that there's you're all putting you're getting around in the operations room there, and you're putting your heads together. Okay, what is every avenue that we can track down now that we got the A team involved here?
Yeah. So we're trying to identify bodies. We're reconstructing their faces. We are searching for missing persons reports to link to bodies. We're searching for related crimes, the robberies, the assaults, the rapes. We're looking at different stations. We're going to them saying, let's look through your docket store, checking our forensic exhibits are submitted and are being processed, all with the eye of what's going to happen one day in court. And of course, any cell phones that we now start to identify that could be stolen, we're trying to trace them.
Are you still carrying other cases at this stage as well? I've never asked you that.
Yeah, look, I mean, I at that point in time, at this point, I was busy with 9 different murder series just that year. We had stuff in Witbank. We had stuff in, I'm just looking at my list here. We had stuff in serial rapists down in Durban that we were working on. We had serial murders in Modimolle. I had about 9 different murder series that were in various stages of investigation that we were working on in the unit. So we never had the luxury of just, focusing on one series at a time.
Okay. All right. Let's jump through the rest of let's jump through the victims until we get to kind of a major step now in the investigation. So we've got body number 7 turns up the 29th of May, 2006. Just any keynotes about this victim?
Very decomposed, sadly. But yeah, nothing forensically, sadly, and not identified either.
Okay. And you also collaborating with the University of Liverpool and bringing what was, I'm sure, tech that has evolved exponentially in the last 15 to 20 years since this case. But tell us a little bit about the involvement of that conversation.
Right. So basically, the short version of this is geographical profiling. We know certain patterns of behavior geographically of serial offenders, from housebreakers to car smash and grabbers, etc., and serial murderers and rapists. And there's some software that's been developed about predicting likely areas where your suspect might live or work. And that's and it works better more in sort of urban areas, not so great out in the open felt. But, we were trying everything we can. You got to at least at the end of the day, if you haven't solved it, you got to prove that you did everything possible.
Yeah. Okay, on to victim 13 then, 8 of 2006.
Luckily, she is identified. She was found, reported, ironically, the day the task team started, 29th of May. She's found 31 July. So again, some period of time has gone through. But remember, it's winter in South Africa. And she'd come to Pretoria with a job offer that someone had offered her with her boyfriend. She comes to meet a guy by the name of Jabu, and then she goes off to meet, they both come to Pretoria, the boyfriend and her, and then she goes off to meet the guy and tells the boyfriend, it's cool, I'll see you later back at home, and of course, never arrives home.
Okay. And then on to victim number 14.
Yeah.
On the 31st of July, 2006, same day as victim 8, 100 meters from the body.
Search the area, find this body, but she had lots of little stab wounds in her that were the cause of death, which is the first time we've had that in this particular series, and also unidentified.
I mean, we're looking at the kind of these big boulders. Just tell us a little. I mean, also this is the Quarry Killer. Ultimately, is his moniker. We're looking at kind of the environment here. You can see that this is between Johannesburg and Pretoria. Obviously this is a mining area, but there are residential areas built up around where the quarry is, but then these big vast landscapes in between. Just give us a little sense of the landscape while we look at some of these images here. And you see these big boulders.
So some of the bodies were found amongst these boulders that you're seeing all around this expanse. For some reason, there was these rocks around the edge of the outer part of the quarry, and you can see the footpaths that people walk, taking shortcuts.
Yeah. Okay. On to then the operation of the 10th of August, 2006.
We're searching the areas at night to see if we can find people sleeping in the bushes. Again, you're just trying whatever you can.
Okay.
We don't, it looked like someone had been sleeping there. We went back there. We didn't find anybody. Again, you have to make your own luck. That's just a view of the area from the aerial view. We had an observation one Sunday because with the victims we identified, we knew went missing on a Sunday. So we're now trying to just check out the vibe in the area on a Sunday. Is it very busy? Is it very deserted? Do we find the suspect coming back with his next victim? Sadly, we didn't achieve anything.
But I mean, very possible, because I mean, he's very active at this time, obviously. Then we come to victim number 15 in September, on the 1st of September, 2006.
So this is the last body before we actually caught the guy, and she proved to be quite a valuable body. We ended up having DNA and her cell phone. So she had worked as a domestic worker in a housing estate in the east of Pretoria, didn't arrive home, had been reported missing, and we were already, before we found her body, I think we'd picked her up as a missing person, if it was this particular case.
Okay.
Let me just double check my notes. And essentially, basically, we were tracking her phone before we even found her actual body. Yeah.
Oh, really? Okay. So you'd actually found out about a missing person and thought this could very well be a part of. Yeah. Okay, that's incredible. And again, it goes to show when you can be really hyper focused on the detail because you've got the right kind of team assembled to really knock the case up. Are you under pressure from Pretoria for results at this stage?
Yeah, I mean, not so. We were called in to speak to the provincial commissioner. How's it going? Are you doing well? And of course, yes, as we're progressing, he's like, but of course they're getting the pressure from the media and everybody else, politicians, to solve the case. So now, I mean, you have the internal pressure. People are dying, and the longer you take to catch this guy, the next victim is going to die. So it's not just pressure to solve a previous case; it's pressure to prevent further cases from happening. So a lot of media pressure.
Sure. Okay. So onto our breakthrough, and like you say, I mean, cell phones played a big part here. But tell us about then how we actually ultimately got to who the elusive Jabu is. Yeah.
So we would have probably tracked him and caught him with the cell phone, which we did ultimately find in his possession that belonged to a victim. But we get a breakthrough. On the 5th of September, we get a call from forensics, and they say to us, hey, remember those cases you asked us to check up and follow up on and that you think could be the work of the same guy? Well, DNA from that lady, remember the lady found with the red pants in the water from 2002, the very last victim, the one that the rock placed on her back? DNA was found there that then matched a guy who was arrested in September of that same year, obviously shortly after the murder, for the attempted rape of a little girl. In fact, it was his girlfriend's daughter who was 9. And there's a match because his DNA was taken for that case, and it now matched your last victim from 2002. Okay. So now we get the breakthrough. We get that docket. The guy's name is Richard Jabulani Nyauza, and of course we know one of our victims went to meet Jabu. We know the DNA match between at least one of the 2002 cases, and we're waiting now for the following matches to our current cases in 2006, which eventually do come through, and that's our guy. And he had been in jail for 4 years because of that attempted rape. He was in jail awaiting trial. He was then found guilty in the magistrate's court. Because then the magistrate's court had a limit on the length of sentence they could give, it was always first reviewed by the High Court before the High Court sentences, and they felt there wasn't actually enough evidence to convict him. So they overturned his guilty verdict, and I think about the 25th of November of 2005, he was released back into society. And as you saw, 2nd of January, we find in our first body of 2006.
He was just raring to go, clearly. All right, Gerard. So how do we get to put in our hands on this guy?
So essentially, like I said, we then asked we speak to the mother of the little girl, and she says, yeah, he's back in the community. He doesn't stay with me, obviously, but I know where he's staying now. And she points out that the house to one of our detectives. We hold the house under observation, and essentially him and his brother are seen arriving at the house. And as they leave again, the task team pounces on them, and we arrest. We exclude the brother very quickly as not being involved, but we then have Richard. We start to process his house forensically. That's what you can see there. He got an RDP house while he was in jail. So he came out, threw his brother out, and he moved in there. And basically start to process the crime scene. We find cell phones belonging to victims, SIM cards in the dustbin outside belonging to victims. So we're starting to link it through cell phone forensics. As we're busy processing, one of our people is interviewing him, and he starts to admit, and eventually at the end of the day, or the end of the evening, he's confessing that he has raped and murdered a number of people. So everything just kind of fell into place on that day, on the 5th of September, 2006.
And this is Richard's home. I mean, very neat and tidy, very nicely kept, very,
And he lived there with his girlfriend.
Well looked after.
Yeah.
His bedroom. Interestingly, if we look at his side table,
on the victim's phones,
there we're finding evidence, and obviously tech of the time, but he is actively using their cell phones, I gather, or he's not.
Yep.
Obviously,
Yep.
I think, I would imagine that today kind of your just general public's knowledge of kind of the use of mobile technology as an investigative tool would be a lot, people would be a lot more aware of that now than they were back in those days, I would imagine, that the cell phones can trip them up a bit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we've cracked the case. We now got the evidence. We've got his own version of events. So we knew we had the right. And of course, the forensics pointed him out, at least linking him to the 2002 case of the lady with.
Well, I think what we're going to do, we're going to finish the story now, Gerard. We've got at 9 o'clock the premiere of True Crime Room with Derek Reedley. So if you want to jump over at 9 o'clock and start watching that, of course, that episode will also be available online for you to watch whenever you like. And of course, the live stream here will be available for you to share and watch again, and like and get folks to help you get your friends to subscribe. Will also be available, and we'll do some Q&A now once the show starts. So let's finish the story. We'll go a few minutes over 9 o'clock if that's okay, Gerard, and we'll talk about some of the listener feedback or the viewer feedback, and we'll take some questions as well. But just to kind of then get to, because let's have a look at the case as a whole, first of all, where all the bodies are then, just to remind ourselves. And here, this image is interesting. Why, Gerard?
Because on the bottom left-hand side, you see a red circle. That's where Richard stayed in 2006. Now, 2002, he also lived in a Liebenau-Bosch, that the sort of lighter areas you can see around that circle. I just can't recall where exactly he stayed. But in 2006, where that red circle is where we arrested him at his house that you saw.
Okay, so there you go, geographic profiling. And like I say, I mean, that's something we must really unpack in future episodes, is where that technology has gone, because it's quite incredible. I mean, we did a whole bunch of series actually just on kind of forensic tech and forensic methods. And wow, there's just some stuff that'll just blow your mind. So we'll be bringing you, definitely be bringing some forensics people onto the podcast as guests and what have you, to tell us about their particular skill sets. Okay, so those are the victims. There's another victim, nonetheless, that is found on the 17th of September, post Richard's capture.
So of course, I get that phone call at night, I think, and I'm like, what? Long story short, this lady had gone missing prior to his arrest. We're only finding her body, obviously, after his arrest, and she'd gone to buy meat in a Liebenau-Bosch, and she phones us just to say, I've met someone who's offered me a job, and that was Richard. And he worked next door to where she was staying. So we also conclusively link that particular case to the series. And then we have one more, which was an attempted murder, where a woman was hitchhiking, and Richard stops in the company Bucky pickup truck off to deliver some ostrich food at a farm. And he says to this lady, oh, well, I'll give you a lift to Botswana because I'm going to Botswana after I've done my delivery. And of course, he ends up doing the delivery with her present, thankfully, because that was great evidence for us, and then stabs her in the chest with a screwdriver. If you remember, one of the previous victims had also pin-like stabs in her chest that killed her, and then puts her back on the pickup truck on the Bucky, and then takes her back to this geographical area and leaves her there thinking she's dead and she's alive. So she ultimately is able to point him out at a lineup, and we also charge him for the attempted murder of that lady.
What are you doing with Richard in the immediate aftermath, especially considering you found another body? Are you kind of keen to kind of draw a line under the number of cases? And are you grilling him on whether or not there are more potential victims to be discovered still?
So we got him to do a pointing out, which is where he agrees to take an officer who was not involved in the case to show him whatever he wants to show him. And he did point out he pointed out some of these bodies, of course, but he then pointed out bodies that like we didn't have a case for. So we don't know whether there was another one or two or three that for some reason we haven't been able to link a body to. That's always a possibility. So that was our most important thing, is to get him to the pointing outs, because he might even point out a body we haven't discovered yet, and we find it when he points it out. And of course, it's great evidence for court that he points out locations where we have found bodies before, because only the suspect would know those locations. And that's very, and once we've done that, unless he wants to speak to us and tell us something more, we're kind of done with him, to be honest with you.
Do you get, so that's it, you're not, I mean, well, we can talk a little bit about kind of what happens to guys like News when they go into the prison system, and whether or not there's an effort to utilize them as an educational tool, to kind of learn from them in captivity kind of thing. But maybe that's something we can talk about in later episodes, unless you have a comment or two on it now.
Yeah, look, I mean, we tried to do that, but we were so busy with active cases that to go and do that for solved cases was just getting very difficult. We did that with Stuart Wilkin. So if you've watched that Showmax series, Boetie Boer, most of that centers around the interview that I did with Stuart over 2 days back in 2006. In fact, the same here as this case. But we just didn't have the time to do it because we were so busy with other cases. But that's the ideal thing to do. I did that as my master's and doctorate research, going to interview these guys. But as cops, we just didn't have the time, to be honest with you.
Yeah. All right. And then it's on to trial. And
so we jump forward.
Here is the man himself in court. And tell us the story about, tell us about his outfit there, Gerard.
Yeah, and obviously, he didn't have really great clothes, so I gave him some clothes that I had that he could treat decently. So we always want to treat our suspects nicely. We're not kissing up to them, but it definitely helps to have them cooperating with you as opposed to fighting against you. And they can fight against you in the court cases by not coming forward on the day that they're called to come to trial, and they just stay in their cell. So they can really complicate things. So we treated him decently, and we have no reason to not treat him decently. So I'd buy him food, bring him food for lunch at court, etc. And in fact, at the end of my evidence, when I got off the witness stand and we adjourned, he actually, as I walked past him, he said, "Thank you very much. And, will I come and help him write his book after this is all over?" Okay. But so we go to trial. We go to trial on now 16 murders and 1 attempted. We use linkage analysis evidence in court, me testifying about how similar the cases were, because you have about 8 where we have some form of evidence, cell phone, DNA, pointing outs, confessions, but 8 we didn't have any evidence, but it was just the similarities. And I was the last witness for the state's case, and I testified about these similarities and that I'm of the opinion that one offender committed these acts. And the judge and his assessor agreed, and they gave a really great judgment, which we would use now in subsequent court cases when we wanted to do linkage evidence as case law about the use of this. And that's quite unique to South Africa that we're using that. And this is really just what the judge ultimately said about specifically the other 8 cases where we didn't have that physical evidence. And if we were to ignore the strikingly similar geographical signature and method evidence, and he's using our terminology, which is great, and that these victims just happened to land into these 2 series, 2002, 2006, randomly. And the person who murdered this lady had knowledge of the other side, other cases. It's just really not likely. And he was ultimately convicted on all the counts put towards him.
Absolutely. And, it's important to say, I mean, so the South African courts do take this linkage analysis really strongly into account because, common sense, a lot of it is common sense and just logically drawing the lines between things, isn't it?
And the experience to say so, yeah.
Yeah, and having the experience to say so, which when you're working as a profiler for SAPS, in the particular unit that you did, you're getting plenty of experience, and I think that goes without saying. All right, so. Finally, would be to talk about what his charges were ultimately. He was accused and found guilty on all the 24 counts that he was charged with. 16
Yeah.
life sentences, 4 20-year sentences for the rape charges, 3 15-year sentences for robbery, and 15 years for attempted murder. And just tell us how those sentences would run. Just explain how it works in South Africa.
Almost always when you're convicted for different incidences, but in one trial, you get sentenced for each of the charges against you for each of those incidences, but they all start to tick down the same time. So you don't first serve, the 10 years for this rape, and then you serve the 10 years thereafter for the next rape. And it doesn't work like that with our legal system, unfortunately. So all your sentences start at the same time. So really, if you had 4 cases against you, and you got 10 years for each of them, you're actually not going to sit more than 10 years. You're not going to sit for 40 years because they all start on day one, and you'll get parole, halfway through, which would be 5 years in that case. So, and once you've got life sentences, of course, that's the longest sentence you can get. And then within 25 years, you'll start to be eligible for parole hearings. Doesn't mean you're going to get parole necessarily. Well, you probably will, knowing correctional services, but after 25 years, doesn't matter if you had 5 life sentences, at 25 years, you will start to be heard for parole hearings.
Unless, like in the case of Michael van Eck, the female perpetrator in that case, explain what happens with her sentence, because this is just the alternative.
There they went for something called the indeterminate sentence, which is typically when you've classified someone as a dangerous criminal. It's a separate procedure you have to undergo after you've been convicted. Typically, you have to be classified as a psychopath. And then the court basically says to you, I'm going to give you, say, 20 years. And then you've got to come back to me, the judge, or another judge if I'm not around. And you have to literally have a new sentencing. You've got to prove that you're rehabilitated. And if you can't prove you're rehabilitated to the judge, they say, another 10 years and I'll see you again. And then you go for 10 years and then you come back. So you don't have parole at any point, and correctional services doesn't get involved in that. But if the judge does feel at that 20-year period, right, you sound like you're rehabilitated, he can say you're released. So it is better. I like it more because correctional services can't mess it up with their terrible parole process. But it's just, I think a lot of prosecutors get to the point where they've got a conviction, they could probably get a life sentence maybe, and I want to go through the extra hassle of now referring the guy to have the dangerous dangerous offender classification. It'll take some time, and I just think they don't feel like doing that, to be honest with you.
Yeah, it's a lot. Yeah, but if there wasn't such a strain on the system, because we've just got so much to deal with, especially now, and things have worsened since this era as well, which is again something which is a common theme here on the show. All right, so that's the case of Richard Nyauza, the Quarry Killer. Like we say, a really good example of what the majority of serial cases, considering just the nature of the demographic nature of South Africa, this is kind of what the majority and men tend to be more likely to be a serial killer. Just a really good case to illustrate not only the modus operandi, etc., but the nature of the environment and what happens to bodies that are left out in the hot African sun.
I use this as a teaching case till today, all these years later, because it's just your prototypical South African serial murderer. So a lot of great teaching points from this particular case. It's really good for that purpose. And if you read my book, it's chapter 3 or 4. It's the second case I think I discuss in my first book. If you want more nitty-gritty details, it'll be this one here.
Yeah. The Profiler Diaries. Do go out and get it. All your favorite bookstores here around South Africa. Is it available outside? How do you get your hands on it if you're not in SA? Do you need to have a buddy in SA and get it posted, or is it available elsewhere?
No, unfortunately, Penguin is only Penguin South Africa. You can get it, I think, Kindle versions, and I think the first one is also audio if you're on Amazon. But ordering a physical copy, you'd probably have to get someone here to buy it for you and ship it over to wherever you are.
Well,
and I
see
they're getting less
frequent
in the bookstores, actually. So if you want to try and get hold of one soon.
Yeah. And Yeah, look out, Jared, you very regularly going out doing signings as well, so you should look out for those if there's any of those pop up in the future. We will let you know if that is to happen at all. But and also what we'll try and do a little shop area where people can maybe buy through the podcast or through the channel. We'll figure that out as well, because I mean, I think we also need to do some merch, maybe, like a cool hoodie or a profiler hoodie, perfect for creeping around in the dark. Anyway, we'll work on that. Get Profiler Diaries. It's a great one. Actually, one of the questions that came up, and I'll see if I can find it, but first of all, let's start. We'll do a bit of Q&A now, and then just some of your comments, and then we'll wrap up. Shelley Foot here, and let's see if we can get them. 20 years for rape and 16 for murder. Yeah, Gerard. Hey?
No, for this one, you got life for all the murders. So you got 16 life sentences. Sorry, I don't know if that slide.
Okay. Sorry, maybe it's wrong. Yeah. But I brought it up because there is I know that it's come up in the past that there's kind of just, you know what I'm talking about.
Sorry, so it was 16 times life sentences, 16, so one for each of those murders. And then I think, after that, I don't really pay too much attention because the other ones mean nothing in terms of the length of his sentence, because they expire long before he even gets to that parole point for his life sentence. So Shelley, sorry, I didn't even notice if that slide was wrong or right. But it was 16 for the 16 life sentences, and I think it was probably 4 times 20 for the rapes.
But you can get, look, I think what I was thinking about was the fact that I've heard sentences where people have gotten bigger sentences for kind of theft and stuff over being accused for rape.
So the minimum sentence for robbery. Yeah. So if I come across you in the street and I grab the phone from your hand and I run off, that's robbery. I'll get 15 years for that. That's the minimum sentence, starts at 15 years. But your first minimum sentence for a first rape is 10 years. It's like bizarre. I think robberies, they were thinking the more violent, aggressive robberies. But technically, grabbing that cell phone out of your hand and running off is robbery, and that's 15 years. But your first minimum sentence for a rape is 10 years. Now, courts can go straight up higher than that. So in this case, he got 4 times 20 for the rapes. So that the judge went way above, double the minimum sentence in this case for the rape cases, because he felt this was very aggravating. It was linked to a murder, etc. So you're getting 20. But sometimes you do get those anomalies where you think, really, you took the cell phone, he's getting 15 years, but he also raped her thereafter, he's getting 10 years for that. And that doesn't make sense to me. I absolutely agree with that. It's bizarre.
Exactly. And obviously, I think one of the common themes when discussing crime in general is just the fact that, it's tough to be a woman in this part of the world. For women and children, the levels of violence and violent crime are far higher than they should be. Okay, we've got a question here from Shivani Mudley. So happy that you're posting content again. 2 general questions for Gerard. How do you protect your mental health when you see the worst of humanity or inhumanity? Do you believe in the inherent goodness of people, Gerard?
I think there's definitely far more good people than there are evil or bad people. I think in my daily routine, I'm meeting people that are far open and decent, and if you're nice to them and kind to them, they'll be helpful. So you kind of have to remember that there's the murders are the anomaly of what society really is. Protecting mental health, you can't get around the fact that it's a stressful job, but probably more stressful because it never ends, and you've always got more cases, and you're backlogging, and you're trying to get ahead, and you've got new cases. So I think that was the biggest stress for me, is this constant pressure that literally, if I used to work until 2 a.m, then wake up and be at work at 7 in the office and work and work and work and work and work. And you never really felt like you were getting ahead of things, except sometimes in December, if you didn't take leave and things were a bit quieter, you could try and catch up. But the minute you hit January 1, you're back sort of behind it. So that was the constant pressure, which was difficult. I never really felt that what I was seeing was having a negative impact upon me. And I think mainly because if you're like a crime scene photographer, and you're just documenting this horrible image of somebody's brutal murder, you may never be involved in the trial. You may never even know if that case is solved. But here we're part of a process which can hopefully lead to the only positive outcome, which is catching the bad guy, bringing justice for the victim and their family. So you see things as part of a bigger picture. And I think that helps. And you get closure because you do at least hopefully get a conviction. And we got convictions in many of the cases we worked on, thankfully, because we had a great team working on these things, and that helps. So we have some kind of closure where, and a paramedic who just comes to this horrible scene doesn't know what happened to the injured person afterwards necessarily, and it's the next horrible scene and the next horrible scene. And I think just as a psychologist, that curiosity about, I'm fascinated by people and why they do things, and crime is just an extreme form of something that people do. So I always found it fascinating to speak to people who've done the most bizarre and horrible, gruesome things. And you also realize that, 99.9% of the time, they're doing the same things that you and I have to do every day. Get up, go to the toilet, shower, brush your teeth, get a job, earn some money, pay the bills. And your crimes are really a tiny proportion of your life. So we have far more in common with these people than perhaps we would like to think of. So it's perhaps in that way also easier after a while to see them a bit more human, not to forgive what they've done, of course, and they must be punished and put away for a long time in the cases we worked on because they were very horrible. Yeah. So that's kind of, I think, and I had a great team of people. That Yanni and Elmarie and later Aubrey and, Andrew and Joyce. We really had a close, nice team of people. Then that becomes a really great supportive network.
And I'm sure that means that there were plenty of end of day braais and beers.
Yeah, like after that observation that we did the one Sunday, Yanni stayed like a stone's throw from these crime scenes. And we just went to his house, had a braai, drank too much red wine, So you did those things. I don't drink at all anymore, thankfully. But and there was a lot of that close camaraderie. You lived day in and day out with these people, and it was great friendships that you built up.
Yes, and I'm going to tell you a little bit before we wrap up, kind of one or two things that are coming up. But Yanni, your good friend Yanni, your detective in arms, you guys work together on so many cases. He will be joining us in the next few weeks on the show. So look out for that. That's going to be exciting. We've got some really exciting people lined up.
That he on and did some fantastic work on.
Yeah. So we'll get to pick his brain, and that means that you guys, by sending us questions like we're answering now, will be able to pick his brain as well. I've got a next question up. I love the new format and you guys doing lives, much more engaging and helps us understand the cases better. Dr. Labuschagne, will I be presumptive in asking if there will be a third Profiler Diaries?
And not at this point in time. It's a lot of work, and you kind of have to feel in the right frame of mind to write these things. I've tried to write before when I wasn't, and it's just a terrible experience that goes nowhere. I'm not sure if they will put it that way at this point.
What about a focus on a single case, maybe, Gerard?
And I've thought about that. There was one particular case, the guy who murdered Andrea Venter, who fled to Brazil. We found him there and brought him back. That was also in that documentary series, Original Sin on Showmax.
Okay.
The anxiety about that is if you write a whole story about one case, if you don't like the story or the case, you don't like the book. Whereas if you have like 6 or 7 stories like Profiler Diaries 1 and 2, you might not like this particular chapter. It wasn't such a great story for you, but you liked 4 or 5 of the other ones, you'll think the book is great. But if you don't like that particular story, if the whole book is just one story, and also I found that when I got to the end of writing one chapter, I felt like I've now done this. I've now put this story to rest, and I move on and I start the next chapter, which is a new story. And I'm almost nervous about doing that with one book because every chapter it's still the same story, and I don't know. So that's a consideration, but just at this point in time, it's not on the current cards, no. But thank you for your interest in whether they'll be third.
Well, and we will keep you informed, and we will do our best to figure out how we can make Profiler Diaries 1 and 2 even more available to you than it currently is, especially if you're outside of South Africa. So lots of questions. Carol, Brett, Dioretta, thank you so much. Do you ever consult back to SAPS on current case? Here's a good question. Let's just do one last question, and then we'll do a couple of comments, then we'll wrap up, I think, for tonight, Gerard. Yeah. So we've got Dioretta here. Do you ever consult back to SAPS on current cases?
SAPS is very funny. If you resign, in other words, you don't get to retirement. If you resign, they kind of take it very personally as an organization, and they literally don't want anything to do with you. And I knew that because I'd seen other people who'd left and gone into private works, from forensics people to other people. And SAPS will never, and they also don't have a system for hiring external consultants. So I've never been I think once I was officially asked to come and assist with something. But I've had a few other detectives that I knew who phoned me for my opinions, but SAPS, no. One case since I left that they officially asked me to get involved in, which is sad. And I also offered to help train new people joining the investigative psychology section, specifically new psychologists. And Bronwyn, my other colleague who left 2 years after me, also made that offer, and they never made use of that. And again, I think they have this issue of you left us, so now you rejected us. We're not going to make use of you, which is sad. I think SAPS in general could make use of a lot of people who've left the service to provide help.
And you are available if they want to call. Your phone is on.
Sure.
Hey?
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. All right. Will these shows be, so Carol asks, will these live shows be a weekly regular going forward? Wouldn't want to miss any. Well, hopefully you won't miss any, Carol. Yes, the majority are going to be live. We're going to pre-record a couple of crackers just for the few weeks over Christmas, so that everyone can head down to the coast for a bit of suntanning. But yes, that's the idea, is to be live every Tuesday at 8. 1 million subscribers is our goal, I think, Gerard, and then we'll be able to bring you all the true crime stories that you want. So you just help us get there, and we'll make sure that we've got the stories.
Hey? If you miss it, Carol, it remains up, so you can watch it later. So even if you miss it, that's important.
Share the link with your friends. Tell your friends about us. We really want to kind of get out there. And not only do we talk about interesting cases, I find, but I think it's really insightful, some of these conversations with regards to some of the real challenges and getting under the skin of some of the real challenges that South Africa faces and the South African justice system faces at the moment. But like we say, Gerard's available if you need any training for the young guys there. All right. Just a couple of other comments I'd like to say. I really liked Andrea Linda's comment during the week where she said, I'd like to ask the public who watch this to please hit that like button in order to help this podcast with their algorithms in order for this stream to gain more exposure. Like I say, I mean, we can't stress enough how much it helps if you just hit subscribe, hit like there if you've been along with us for the ride tonight, or if you are watching the pre-record. Please hit like, hit subscribe. And if you love us even more and you want to contribute and you want to make South African YouTube content and African YouTube content the best in the world, then you can become a member. You find all the information on the YouTube page. We've got an amazing interview with the detective who solved last week's case, an uncut interview of her talking about how she solved that case. And also then go to Patreon, just look for Profiler Africa. So that was that, Gerard. Thank you so much. The Quarry serial murders, I think, remind us how often the lines between our everyday lives and true crime can blur for many South Africans, and for South African women in this case. Richard Jabulani's Reign of Terror in the Quarry shows just how crucial all the specialized techniques and solid police work are in unraveling the threads of serial murder. And I mean, I always want to commend you, Gerard, on you guys had such a good hit rate back in the day, and such amazing stories that come out of them as well. Next week on Profiler, we'll be covering the tragic case of Susan Rhodes, whose death at Spear Wine Farm in 2016 shook the nation. Initially ruled a suicide, the truth behind her death was far more sinister, revealing a shocking tale of betrayal, deceit, and a husband's attempt to cover his tracks. So make sure you join us next week. Wow, Brett, we love your super chat, man. There's Brett. Thank you, Brett. Brett Lane, there's our guy. Thank you, Brett. Our first ever super chat. That feels good. Thanks, guys. Support local content. We love it. We've got absolute gems coming up as well. I mentioned retired Lieutenant Colonel Jan de Lange will be joining us. And now this is a good one. Can I mention this one? And
I think you should.
Gerard was at a function last week and he bumped into a bud of his. And he asked her if she'd be willing to come on the podcast and have a chat with us. So for the first time ever, guys, coming up in the next few weeks, keep on the channel and on our social media pages to learn about it. Gerard and Mickey Pistorius interviewed a bit by me, but really I think a discussion between you guys about, and obviously Mickey Pistorius started the forensic psychology unit in the 90s. Gerard took over from Mickey. Mickey was the subject of that series of the series there on Showmax, Catching a Killer, or I can't do yeah, something like that. So check that out. And also she's got a great podcast as well, so we want to talk to her about that because we want to support our true crime buds, like our friends over at True Crime South Africa as well. And hopefully we'll get, we'll get, I'd really like to have the kind of podcast true crime community kind of come and be a part of the show as well. So that's going to be amazing. The first time ever, Gerard and Mickey Pistorius in conversation, talking about their careers and the, hey, sorry, Gerard?
Same platform at the same time.
It's going to be awesome. I can't wait. I'm so excited. Share this episode with your friends. Hit that like button if you found the case insightful. And don't forget to subscribe to stay up to date with all our live shows and exclusive content. Every share, every like, and every subscription helps us expand our reach and brings more important stories to light. A huge thank you to Amy, Fred, Bax, and of course to you, Gerard. Any final thoughts? Final words?
Be safe. That's all.
Be safe.
Be safe and be kind to other people. Yeah, that's my biggest takeaway.
Exactly. This has been Profiler. Keep looking over your shoulder, folks.
I am a human being and I kill human beings.
Before I knew it, I'd fired 4 shots at the door. I kept on shouting for Eva to phone the police.
Tests are underway to determine if a serial killer is on the loose in Centurion, Pretoria.
The dead won't bother you. It's the living you gotta worry about.